Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown from this past weekend, which saw Black Widow break some records, as a lot of people have been talking about and discussing. But we're going to go ahead and dive into the numbers as they are actually stated and talk about a little bit more of what is actually going on as far as the profitability front of that film. But before going any further, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these numbers coming to thenumbers.com. And as you can see right here, I don't know what I'm saying today. Black Widow came in at $80,366,000. Again, a very impressive number there during pandemic times, but I think it has to be noted that this is only about $10 million more than what Fast 9 had in its opening debut. Fast 9 opened to $70 million. Black Widow opened to $80 million. This is talking about the domestic marketplace. Another important factor to remember is that Black Widow actually doubled the Thursday premiere numbers of Fast 9 and yet was not able to continue that same momentum in the same way, which is why it was only about $10 million more and not a lot more than that. A lot of the people who were making projections on the movie thought the film was very much going to cross $100 million, and Disney, of course, and many other shill outlets are going to go ahead and tell you, well, technically they did cross $100 million if you count the Disney Plus numbers, because about 20 million of that is from America, which, hey, 20 million plus 80 million, what do you know? That happens to add up perfectly to $100 million, which is all they care about. They just care about being able to plaster that number all over the place and not actually focus on the reality situation, which is they have never released their numbers from Disney Plus before. It's very convenient that they wait for the MCU film to come out for them to break precedent and for the first time ever say, oh, by the way, we made about this much. And again, this is something that no one else can track, no third-party members can really track, because all of this is stuck behind a paywall and also stuck, again, within Disney exclusively. It's not like the box office where they have to have reports put out there, and you have a lot of different third-party trackers that will have that information put out. And you can also, of course, go to theaters and get their numbers, and there's a lot more way of being able to show the numbers as being credible and also to make adjustments after the fact. You can't really do that with the Disney Plus numbers. You kind of just got to be like, oh, okay, Disney says that they made $60 million, and so we have to just accept that. And then when you remember the fact that they claim to have over 100 million members worldwide, and they made $60 million, you start to realize that, oh, a huge portion of their base did not actually buy this movie on Disney Plus. Now, again, one could argue that they went to the theaters instead, but seeing that the film made $80 million domestically, a lot of people want to go see it. There's no doubt about that. My theater was pretty packed even early in the morning on a Friday. But looking at this, I will say the numbers aren't really as good as a lot of people are trying to say. Now, I will not make any predictions on whether or not this movie will make money or not. I am not calling Black Widow a flop by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm merely saying is that I think a lot of people are kind of jumping the gun on this because we have to wait and see what those week 2 numbers are going to be. Because even though $80 million is very impressive for pandemic times, when you look to other films and what they were able to get domestically and worldwide in their opening weekends, this is still far off the mark. And when a movie still cost the same amount, if not more, because remember, this film was delayed several months, and so you have to take that into account. That means a lot more money spent on marketing, things of which, of course, they're not going to probably put out there for the public to see. But this film, when everything was said and done, cost at least $300 million to make, which is the same as it would have been prior to the pandemic, but the numbers are a lot less. And you have actually a lot of experts saying that we won't get back to 2019 levels until 2024. So this film still very much could be a flop for Disney, but it's going to determine, or rather depend, on what kind of drop-off we see week 1 to week 2 for this film. But another big thing here is that even though studios do not get a lot of money from China, about 25% of the box office, this movie is not getting a China release. And that is a good $50 to $60 million in net gain, net profit from China that could have pushed them over the edge that they're not going to have access to. And that is, I think, going to end up being a possible factor. And again, depends on what kind of drop-off we see. It has gotten very mixed reviews. There are people that are overly positive about it. There are people probably overly negative about it. For me, I just think it's not a very well-made movie. Not just objectively, but obviously subjectively, I don't like it either. But that is just my own view. That is just what I personally see in the film, looking at the different objective factors within it. But there are still a lot of people who say, I admit that there's these objective flaws. However, I still subjectively enjoy it. And I think you're going to have enough people out there, especially the normie audience, the non-comic book fan audience, people who kind of just are there to consume and shove popcorn down their mouth. Enough of those people are going to go see this movie. And so it'll be interesting to see what those week 2 numbers are going to be. Fast 9 in its third week dropped another 50%. Now it is over $100 million, well over $100 million. It had already passed that after 2 weeks. So it is now at $141 million domestically, while The Boss Baby has dropped 45% in its second week. However, it did not make a whole lot in its first week. So at $34.9 million for the domestic market, this film, based on my current projections, is going to be a massive flop. But we'll talk about that, of course, and let's go ahead and dive into some of these individual numbers and also talk about a couple more of these. So obviously you see The Forever Purge came in at number 4 with $7 million. That's a 43% drop in its second weekend for a film that cost as little as it did. That's actually a pretty good showing there. And A Quiet Place Part 2 continues to make money, even 7 weeks out, making $3.1 million. Right now, it's one of the most financially successful movies when you break down the actual cost of the film versus how much it made and the different percentages that you have to account for. Right now, it is probably the most profitable film, or one of the most profitable films to come out this year. That and The Conjuring 3 so far have the most impressive numbers when you look at actual net gains. So let's go ahead and look at the Black Widow numbers. So right now, according to the numbers, it's $159.1 million worldwide. Now, depending on the site that you're at, you might see variations of this number, but what this is not including is the claimed Disney Plus number. And when even people like Scotty Boy Mendelson over at Forbes is saying that is cheating for Disney to try and claim the $60 million Disney Plus number when they've never done that in their history, and almost no streaming service at this point has ever really revealed how much money they made off of a movie, I think that he absolutely has a point. It hurts me inside to say that Scott Mendelson has a point, but it is a good point nonetheless. I don't think we can include that $60 million worldwide number because that is, again, only coming from Disney. It's being reported by various news agencies, but again, it's going by Disney's words here. I don't think that they've actually released any of their metrics or any other information that could actually be used to verify this, but hey, that is kind of just the name of the game when it comes to these streaming services. Now they can hide everything behind their paywall, everything behind their own proprietary software, and they can claim whatever it is the heck they want. And then if someone calls them out or does their own research on it, they can say, well, our number was actually a projection based off X, Y, or Z, and again, make excuses for it. So all we can go then off of is this box office number. But even if you do include the $60 million that they claim to have made from Disney Plus, they are still very much in the red. And we'll talk about that and break that down when we get to the full chart. As you can see, Fast and Furious 9, $542 million. Black Widow, depending on its second weekend, likely will probably end around here, but also has a chance of making less because, remember, this is including $215 million from China, and Black Widow is not going to have access to that. Now, Fast 9, it has to be said, this movie is actually not as financially successful as a lot of people think because $215 million from China, they only get about 25% of that. The studio only gets about 25% of that. The rest goes to the Chinese Communist Party of China. Again, this is the reason why I think studios should start to say, yeah, you know what, screw you. We're not going to work with you anymore, and you're not going to get our money. But it is still a pretty fair amount of change when you look at that huge number. But when you take 25% of $215 million, you're more close to around $50 million in actual net gain profit. That number then becomes a lot less impressive when you take away $200 million and then add about 50. Again, there's a huge discrepancy there, and it brings it into the territory of, is this film really all that profitable? Again, I think that's something that is definitely something worth asking. What we can say is a massive flop is Boss Baby, which has only made $37.8 million worldwide. Again, a sequel I don't think a lot of people asked for. Forever Purge, proving once again that if you make a very low-budget movie and enough people decide to go see it, hey, you can make a little bit of profit here and there. And A Quiet Place Part 2 also showing that people do crave movies that are built in new original universes. Again, this is the second film in this specific universe. I personally got to see it, loved it. I thought it was a great sequel, great follow-up to the original movie. The ending for me was a little bit abrupt, but other than that, I enjoyed it and can't wait to see what else happens in this universe. But I think it does show you the movies that are doing incredibly well are typically the movies that allow people to escape into these worlds and tend to be ones where you find them, a little bit more of an original idea. Anyway, so again, those are the actual numbers themselves. So we'll go ahead and now go to the website, ombreviews.com. Go ahead and check that out if you want to find out ways to support the channel and to look at the box office tracking. So I put those numbers in the other day. So obviously there's been some small adjustments to the numbers, but again, they're pretty close nonetheless. You'll see the numbers are a little higher here because I try to go to boxofficemojo.com when I think that there might be a discrepancy between that and the numbers. The numbers is a great site, but it's not always the most accurate in that capacity. But I can now make some projections as far as Boss Baby 2 and The Forever Purge. So with both of them coming in at their second week, right now Boss Baby 2 at $36 million, or around $36 million, The Forever Purge around $34 million, puts my projections for those movies to be around, for the Boss Baby 2, making as much as $72 million by the end of its run, and making as small as $52 million by the end of its run, with The Purge making between $49 million and $69 million. But the big difference, of course, is the fact that Boss Baby 2 cost $82 million, and then add on marketing, that's $123 million total, versus the Forever Purge, which costs only $18 million, which means the marketing with it makes it $27 million, meaning Boss Baby is going to lose somewhere between $91 and $79 million. So basically, Boss Baby 2 is a guaranteed flop at this point. Obviously, I'm not including any other revenue streams because there's no way for us to really track that. Goes back to my point about Disney+. Disney can claim these various things all that they want, but until there's actual data that other people, third party, can actually look at and break down, we kind of got to take their word for it. And for me personally, I'm not going to take Disney or any other major studio's word for it because they're going to want to spin their films as much as they can. They can say, hey, yeah, Boss Baby 2 was the most watched film on Peacock or whatever service. And that is not going to mean really anything, especially since I believe Boss Baby 2 is actually free if you are a Peacock subscriber. Like if you're on maybe even the free level, at the very least, you have to be a $5 or $10 a month person. So there's not any extra charge for the film, which again, good move on their part, I guess, because it's not like Disney where they're like, hey, we're going to put it behind a paywall and then you got to pay extra to get access to it. So I guess kudos in that way. However, it's going to be a major cost to them in the long run because they're not going to make that money back. At $36 million as of the 11th, they're at a negative $101 million loss, but I suspect they'll make a little bit more, not much, but it'll be enough for them to remain in the red. Again, maybe they'll make that up through other revenue streams that we don't know about, or Blu-ray DVD sales. I doubt it, but hey, I don't think we'll see a Boss Baby 3, but hey, there's been films that have lost money that have already been guaranteed sequels, so what would I know? Going then also to The Forever Purge, as you can see, the projections right now have the film making anywhere between $2 and $14 million. Right now it's at -6, but based on my projections, it's going to make enough money over the next several weeks in order for it to make its money back and to make at least a very small net gain profit. So again, at least $2 million, potentially as much as 14. I would say probably it's going to be closer to that $2 million mark because there's other films coming out towards the end of July, which are going to obviously make the box office the most crowded it's ever been with new releases since the start of the pandemic. So that's going to have an impact, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens to that. Now, going back to Black Widow, as I was talking about before, $200 million is the budget for Black Widow, meaning with marketing, it's $300 million. Next week, I'll be able to actually give you projections on what, according to the numbers as we have them, is likely going to be the final number, right? The final outcome that we actually see. But as it stands right now, at around $158 million worldwide, it is at a negative $204 million loss. The reason why that is the case is remember that they spent $300 million on the movie. They only get around 60% of the box office when everything is said and done. So assuming then the 158.8 is the final, and obviously every week that number will change, and every week the current gain loss will go down as well, it would mean that the film would still need to make $204 million in net gain profit back. And again, you have to take 60% of the total number as it's going through. Now, because they don't have any money in China right now, they're not as bad off, because if that was $158.8 million with a China release, I mean, that would be pretty bad, but they don't have to worry about that. However, that means that they do have to make up that money somewhere else. And so, again, depending on that drop off from week 1 to week 2 in various markets, most especially the domestic market, That'll be a big determining factor. But as you can see, this number is very different than what we have seen from other films in the past. But right now, it's at a negative $204 million loss. But if anyone's wondering, hey, what is something that we can compare this to? Well, let's just talk about even films that came out this year. Godzilla vs. Kong, because it did have a China release, opened to around $285 million. So Black Widow lost in its opening weekend to Godzilla vs. Kong. This is, again, two films coming out in the pandemic period, with the only major difference being that Godzilla vs. Kong came out in China and Black Widow did not. Let's look at some other films. Obviously, it's performing a lot better than movies like Wonder Woman 1984 and almost every other film that has come out during the pandemic. But let's look at Sonic the Hedgehog, right? That was right around pandemic starting time, which probably had an impact. Again, that opened to $101 million. So really not a whole lot more than Sonic the Hedgehog. Going to a couple of other films. Rise of Skywalker, right? Star Wars Episode 9. The ninth film in the franchise, after they had lost about half of their audience, still made $373.5 million worldwide. Now, again, that's including China numbers here. But as you can see, the numbers, when you compare it to films like Frozen 2, Jumanji 3, even Terminator Dark Fate made $123 million in its opening weekend worldwide. Joker, $236 million. This is, I think, a better one to compare it to because Joker also did not have a China release. So Joker was able to make around $236 million, whereas Black Widow only made $158.8. Now, again, this is pandemic times, but that is something that people are not telling you. They're trying to say, oh, this is so good for pandemic times. The box office is back, baby. But you look at Joker. Strong opening weekend. Very small drop-off from week 1 to week 2. No China numbers to have to deal with. But also, the budget was incredibly small for a film that made as much as it did. Remember, the film cost $55 million. 82.5 when you add in marketing, which is the reason why it made over $1 billion and had a $562 million net gain profit. Black Widow is not going to come anywhere close to that as far as a net gain profit, let alone close to $1 billion. In order for that to happen, it would have had to have had probably a similar box office opening and probably also would have needed to have China. However, that would have made the number not nearly as impressive because of that 25% cut that they would get. But hopefully everyone can see that when it comes to films like Black Widow or Fast 9, going to Fast 9 since I had mentioned that earlier, everyone's looking at the numbers saying, hey, $541 million, that's incredibly impressive. $25 million net gain profit. But China accounts for $215 million worth of their profits. So that turns into $50 million in actual net gain profit. You start to realize, oh, they're still probably in the red based on just those box office numbers alone. There's a similar thing I was bringing up with Godzilla vs. Kong as well, because it also had a pretty big number, again, $436 million with a $29 million total net gain gross, but a lot of that money also came from China, and when you take into account the amount of money you have to take away that goes to the Chinese Communist Party, you start to realize, okay, yeah, those numbers aren't nearly as impressive. So what can we say? Well, we can say Boss Baby 2 is a flop. We can say that movies like The Forever Purge is doing pretty well. Again, low-budget films are doing a little bit better, but even some low-budget films like, for instance, we had mentioned Spiral, right, in the Book of Saw. That movie, incredibly low budget, wasn't able to make enough money back to be able to be profitable. Black Widow, the big talk of the town. Everyone's saying $60 million. Even if you added that $60 million to that net, complete, 100% theirs. We don't know what kind of deals they have with other countries, but at the very least, $20 million of that is probably going to be 100% revenue for them from Disney+, and I would assume the rest would be too. So let's assume $60 million then. You're still looking at around $140 million loss that they have to make up for. And as I said, we will have a better idea of the profitability of this movie once we actually get the week 1 and week 2 drop-off. But anyone saying this movie is a gigantic success, the most successful film of the year, it is really not all that impressive. When you look to the fact that another film that came out during the pandemic, Godzilla vs. Kong, made a lot more in its opening weekend. And when you look to what it was like prior to the pandemic with big releases and movies making tons of money worldwide, you start to realize, oh, actually, yeah, it still has a long way to go. Because, again, the cost is the same. Pre and current pandemic period, the return is not. And that, I think, the return is going to be the killer for a film like Black Widow, because it still costs as much. Because remember, when they made this movie and were making this movie and the process of this, they were assuming the box office would be fine, that it would be the same. They were expecting to make probably well over $200 million in its opening weekend, probably very close to what a Joker would have done, or something close to what a Godzilla vs. Kong would have done, or something even more than that, like a Frozen 2, making over $300 million worldwide. But that didn't happen because we are still in the pandemic period. There are still tons of theaters that are closed. Again, I think 81% or so of theaters in the United States, at the very least, are open. So the vast majority of them are open, but a lot are still closed. You still have a lot of people not wanting to go to the actual theater. All of these things have to be taken into account before we can say anything is a success or not. Now, Disney's going to spin it as a success because it is right now the best opening weekend in the pandemic period for films that have not yet been released in China. Again, Godzilla vs. Kong still technically has the best worldwide opening. Now, Black Widow can say it had the best domestic opening. There's a lot of truth to that, but not the best worldwide opening. So again, it's going to hold on to whatever, accolades and whatever things it can possibly hold on to, but there's always more to the story. Anyway, I wanted to go a little bit long today because I wanted to make sure that I made very clear why the numbers are so important to look at and all of the different contextual things that have to be talked about to understand them properly. But anyway, what are your thoughts about these numbers? Do you think Black Widow is going to have a strong second weekend? Even if it does, because it is not getting China money, which again is a good thing, but also a bad thing depending on how you look at it, but also the fact that it is underperforming where other major releases have done pre-pandemic period, but have the same cost as pre-pandemic period movies. What impact do you think that's going to have on their bottom line? And do you buy the $60 million Disney Plus number opening? I personally have my questions about it. And again, they can claim it and try and add it to it and say this is what the actual number is. But even when you add that, and even if you assume it's going to make over $100 million on Disney Plus, which I think is a bit of a stretch, it may not still be enough because of how much money this movie costs to make. But let me know your thoughts about this and all the things I mentioned in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Shout out to Bifford the Hobbit for becoming my newest member on Locals, but he is still a Patreon member listed for this month, and so he's still in the shout out video, but I will update that to Locals at the end of the month. Anyway, you guys are great. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Andrew Hoyle, Bifford the Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribe Star members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J. Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And I also want to make sure to shout out my Locals members. I am now available over at locals.com, and I've got 2 monthly supporters over there. The first of my local supporters is Goblin Squatch. Shout out to you, good sir. And also, I now have a second supporter over on locals.com, and that is Robert Barnes. Shout out to both of you very much. Thank you very much for supporting me on that new platform at the Keeper of the Bifrost level. If you want to find out more information about that, go check out my Locals page. You can find the link in the description, and it tells you everything that you would get in that Keeper of the Bifrost level, which is right now the only level available on that platform. And I also want to make sure to shout out any new Patreon members, and for right now, I want to shout out Mondo Spieler, who is my newest member over on Patreon. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribe Star as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.